Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Film Etc., the only movie review podcast you need in life. My name is Mike Webb. I'll be your host, and this is kind of a different episode. Instead of me usually reviewing the new releases of the week and grade them on a scale from 0 to 10, this time in particular, I'm doing something very special. We are halfway through the year, and I want to look back and tell you all my picks for the best and worst movies of 2021 so far. Now, keep in mind, I am recording this episode in advance because by the time this episode comes out, I will be on vacation. So I hope you sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of Film Etc. Just to give you all a bit of a heads up, I am autistic in general. I don't do well in conversation. My words get jumbled up here and there. And also about this podcast, I had to work on this 11th hour style. Like I had to rush this podcast before I left town. So you may hear me try my best to convey what I wanted to say about all these movies in particular. And I've left some details out that I should have said while I'm recording this. But anyway, guys, I hope you all forgive me, and I hope you have a fun time listening to this week's episode. Thank you all so much for listening. Now, before I begin this list of the best movies of the year so far, I want to point things out. I've not seen every single movie. It's kind of tough when you're balancing a podcast hobby that you like to do and a job overall, and you don't have enough time to make up for it. So I haven't seen the smaller movies that are considered like the best of. Like there's a documentary called A Casa My Home, which is a Romanian documentary. There's also little independent films that I've heard nothing but rave things about, like Shiva Baby and Together starring Ed Helms. I have not seen that. You will also notice that there have been some movies that came out in 2020 but then didn't reach a wider audience until 2021. So, for example, the movies Nomadland and Minari, they will not be on this list because although they weren't hugely accessible until earlier this year, both those movies did have a 1-week virtual cinema engagement run in December. And so those movies will not be featured on this list. So without further ado, let's get to my personal picks for the top 10 movies of 2021 so far. But first, here's some honorable mentions I'd like to point out. The first of my honorable mentions is a small little independent film that was actually shot here in my home state of Utah called The Killing of Two Lovers. It is the narrative feature film directorial debut of writer, director, and editor Robert Machoyan. It's about an ex-husband who... The movie is about a man who is separated from his wife and family, and but his ex-wife is in a relationship, and then he's trying so hard and very desperately to try and cope with the family and stuff like that. It kind of plays out like a drama with a little bit of thriller elements. It's mostly shot in the 4:3 aspect ratio, which is like a square. It's really like dramatic and tense throughout. You just like don't know what's gonna happen next. It's only 85 minutes long. I highly recommend this little independent film, The Killing of Two Lovers. That's the first of my honorable mentions. But also a little documentary that not a lot of people have heard about called Gunda, spelled Gunda. It's all in black and white. And it's all about farm animals. No narration, no musical score to accompany with. It's all just beautiful black and white footage about farm animals, including a pig, a couple cows, and a one-legged chicken. They were all shot in farms across Europe, and it's a really beautifully shot film, but it's devastating. The last shot, which is like an unbroken, like 15-minute long take, it'll just leave you like thinking about what this movie is trying to tell you about, which is actually almost kind of like a propaganda on veganism, because Joaquin Phoenix is an executive producer. Because I remember during his Oscar speech last year where he's explaining to the whole world about why killing animals is not good for the world and all this stuff. And I tweeted, I was like, is Joaquin Phoenix trying to convince us to make us all go vegan? Because if so, he failed. He lost my interest. But other than that, Gunda is a really powerful, beautiful yet powerful documentary. And then the Sparks Brothers, if you haven't heard my episode on it a couple weeks ago, you guys should check out that review. Really, really good. Another one of my honorable mentions is a film that I watched at Sundance earlier this year virtually, but it won't come out until sometime later this year. It is a movie called Mass. It stars Jason Isaacs, Martha Plimpton, Ann Dowd, and Reed Birney. And the premise of the film is very simple. It's about two sets of parents. Both their sons were killed in a mass shooting, and it's years later, and they confront each other at this room inside a church building. But the dialogue in this movie is just so powerful. Like, you're just like watching them just like tearing their lives apart and all that stuff. It's all in this one room. It's kind of like a modern day like version of 12 Angry Men, in my opinion. And 12 Angry Men is one of my all-time favorite movies. The only reason why it's not in my top 10 is that it's almost 2 hours long, and it almost doesn't need to be that long, but it's still like something that is like completely relevant. And it's just shocking to see how you can experience the trauma and stress from what these actors, their characters in particular, are going through with like the loss of a child and everything. And the last two honorable mentions are both horror films: A Quiet Place Part 2, which I've already reviewed on this podcast. If you haven't checked that episode out, my thoughts are in there. But also a horror film that came out earlier in the year called Saint Maud. If you thought movies like The Exorcist and The Omen will creep you out, you are not prepared for what Saint Maud has to offer. It's not like too satanic in a way, in my personal opinion. Rather, it's about a caregiver played by Morphy Clark, who takes care of a woman who's dying, and she believes that she can feel God's presence inside her. And where this movie goes, it's just jarring to look at it, but in the best way possible. Like, it's horrifying, it's haunting, it's creepy. Like, I like freaked out at like the last like 10 minutes of the movie and just like, oh man, what the heck is going on here? But yeah, check those movies out, Saint Maud and Quiet Place Part 2. Anyway, guys, those are my honorable mentions, and now here are my top 10 picks for the best movies of 2021 so far. My number 10 pick for the best movie of 2021 is a film from the Ivory Coast called Night of the Kings. I have a couple foreign films on this list, but Night of the Kings, it's about a young man who is sent to prison in the middle of the Ivorian forest ruled by its inmates. And as tradition goes with the rising of the Red Moon, he is designated by the boss to be a storyteller and has to tell a story to the other prisoners. But learning what fate awaits him, he begins to narrate the mystical life of the legendary outlaw named Zama King, and he has no choice but to make his story last until dawn. It's a really interesting movie. It combines a prison drama with like fable storytelling of like African folklore, and it's really, really interesting to watch. It is from filmmaker Philippe Lacote, and when I watched this movie, I was completely entranced. It has beautiful cinematography, and it's a quick movie. It's only 93 minutes long. I could not recommend it wholeheartedly enough. I like the performance of the main character. His name is Roman. He's played by an actor named Kona Bakari. He's really good. And you also get like a small appearance from French actor Denis Lavant. It's a really good movie. The only downside to this movie is that there are some visual effects that are not convincing enough for me to like give it a higher rating. But yeah, still check it out though. Night of the Kings. It's a really interesting film from the Ivory Coast. My number 9 pick, I just got to watch this movie last night as of recording this, and I'm so glad I had enough time to watch this movie. It is a movie called Limbo. It is from writer-director Ben Sherrick. It takes place in an offbeat observation of refugees in this like remote Scottish island, and they're all waiting to be granted asylum. It focuses on one particular refugee named Omar, who is a young Syrian musician who is burdened by the weight of his grandfather's instrument called an oud or oud. I don't know how you pronounce it. It's spelled O-U-D, but he carries it all the way from his homeland, but he also has friends that he shares like a home with, including this Afghan refugee named Farhad, played by Vikash Bai. The Syrian refugee is played by a Egyptian British actor named Amir El Mazri. He's really, really good. It plays out like an offbeat comedy. Like, there are moments in the film where you just cannot help but laugh at. It's a very odd movie. It's also a gorgeously shot movie. I'm going to say the word gorgeously shot over and over again for most of these picks on this list. It's nicely edited. It has wonderful symmetry. The only reason why it's not higher up on this list is that there is a little bit of pacing towards the second half of the film. There's like one scene that just like drags for a little bit. It's very charming. It's heartwarming. I cannot tell you how much I really enjoyed Limbo. It is available for purchase on digital streaming services, but it won't come out until, I believe, July 13th for rent. But yeah, check this one out, Limbo. You all are going to have. My number 8 is the Danish movie Riders of Justice from writer-director Anders Thomas Jensen and stars Mads Mikkelsen. It is an action comedy. It's one of the very first movies that I reviewed on this podcast. If you guys have not checked this movie out, I suggest you go over to the very first review of Film Etc., where I reviewed Riders of Justice. It is my number 8. It is a really good movie. My number 7 is a Bosnian film called Quo Vadis Aida. Now, this was, in fact, nominated for the Oscar this year for Best International Feature Film, but it lost to the Danish film Another Round, which also starred Mads Mikkelsen. But Quo Vadis Aida, it takes place around 1995. It's basically about the invasion of Srebrenica, which is a small town in Bosnia. It follows the main character, Aida, who is a UN interpreter, and mainly the whole film of it is trying to get her family safe from Serbian forces. And it's a very powerful, very intense film from beginning to end. It's really, really incredible, and by the end of it I was just like in tears. Just like, it's probably one of the most powerful, most intense movies I've seen. It'll make you feel stressful, but in a very good way. I wholeheartedly recommend it. My number 7 pick, Quo Vadis Aida, from writer-director Jasmila Zabanik. My number 6 is a movie that I got to watch at Sundance virtually this year, but it will come out sometime in August. It is a movie called Coda. It's all in caps, which means Child of Deaf Adults. It stars Amelia Jones as a teenage girl who is a child of deaf adults. She has deaf parents. She has a deaf brother, but she is in high school and she wants to pursue a career of music. Like, she loves to sing, but the problem is her family's in the fishing business, and she has to be like kind of like the one who has to be like an interpreter to the family and all that stuff. And so she's caught in between wanting to pursue her dreams and then helping with the family business and stuff. It is a wonderful, charming little movie that I got to see at Sundance. I will talk more about it in depth when the movie comes out this August, but if you guys want, you could check out the trailer and just be like surprised that a movie like Coda exists. I'll talk more about it in depth in August, but for now, Coda is currently my number 6. My number 5 is the latest Disney animated film, Raya and the Last Dragon. I'm pretty sure most of you know what this movie is about, but it's beautifully animated. It is surprisingly funny. It is one of those rare Disney movies you see nowadays. The voice cast is incredible, from the works of Kelly Marie Tran to Awkwafina to Gemma Chan to Daniel Day Kim to Benedict Wong to Sandra Oh. All pretty good in this movie. If you haven't checked out Raya and the Last Dragon yet, it is available on Disney Plus. I don't think you have to pay any money for it. I think it's available for free now. But yeah, Raya and the Last Dragon. However, it is not the best animated movie of the year. That goes to my number 4 spot, which is The Mitchells versus the Machines. My goodness, was this movie a surprise. It is funny, it is delightful, it is surprisingly charming and heartfelt. I just like was just like excited that a movie like that, when I saw the trailer for this, I don't know if I had like any interest in this whatsoever, but the movie overall proved me wrong, and I just cannot believe how meta it is. This would be like a close race between Mitchell's vs. Machines and Ryan the Last Dragon for best animated feature film of the year so far. But I think Mitchell's vs. the Machines has a slight edge because of the relevancy and all that. But yeah, if you haven't checked out Mitchell's versus the Machines, do yourself a favor. It's on Netflix. Watch it there. You all are going to have a good time. My number 3 is kind of a cheat because I did see this movie in 2020 during a festival run, and then I saw it again in February when it came out, February, March, and then took my mother and my sister-in-law to see it with me. It is The Father, written and directed by Florian Zeller, starring Anthony Hopkins in his Oscar-winning performance. He won his second Academy Award for that. It is a wonderful movie. It revolves around a man living with dementia, and the movie basically plays out like we're in his head, like what is real and what is not real, what is happening to him overall. It's a really fascinating movie. Anthony Hopkins is terrific in this, as is Olivia Colman. If you haven't checked out The Father yet, do yourself a favor and watch it. It not only won Anthony Hopkins Best Actor Oscar, but it also won Best Adapted Screenplay as well. So check out The Father if you haven't. My number 2 pick is another movie that also got a lot of Oscar nominations earlier this year, but I did see this movie when it premiered at Sundance virtually. It is Judas and the Black Messiah from director Shaka King. It is a biopic about Fred Hampton, the leader of the Chicago, Illinois Black Panther Party, and it's about his relationship with Bill O'Neill, who became an FBI informant to take down Hampton. Basically, if there are movies that take place during history, like real life events, there's like no spoilers to be told. But the way this movie plays out is really, really fascinating. It kind of reminds me of how when Coppola made The Godfather, and he didn't know that a movie like this could be like so influential. I think probably within 30, 40 years from now, people will look back at Judas and the Black Messiah and say how influential this movie would be to filmmakers and stuff. As great cinematography from Sean Bobbitt, great editing, great score, the performances from Dan Kaluuya, Lakeith Stanfield, Dominique Fishback, Jesse Plemons. It is wonderful. If you haven't seen Judas and the Black Messiah yet, do yourself a favor, rent the movie. You're going to have a wonderful time. It is rated R, for mainly for language and for violence, but it's a wonderful, powerful and shocking and also highly relevant film, basically about the relevancy of where the world has been in the past year. But yeah, check out Judas and Black Messiah. It's my number 2. And my number 1 best movie of 2021 so far. Who could guess other than In the Heights from director John M. Chu, Lin-Manuel's Tony Award-winning musical that he made before Hamilton. It is a beautiful musical, and one musical we rarely get nowadays. You rarely see it from the side of the Latino community, the Central American community who like moved to New York to like start their own dreams and everything. It's wonderful. If you haven't seen it, in fact, nobody is seeing this movie in theaters. It's like dropping less and less. It even lost over 1,000 theaters in its 3rd week of release. So do yourself a favor and see In the Heights. I encourage all of you to see In the Heights. If you want to check out my review of In the Heights and how much I love this movie, just go over to a previous episode of Film Etc. where I reviewed In the Heights and listen to my full thoughts there. So anyway, guys, those are my picks for the best movies. Before I begin telling you all about the worst movies of 2021 so far, I am recording this late at night, shortly before I leave town for the next couple of days. But anyway, guys, I'm just going to skim all these through just so that you can all express my opinion. So I hope you all forgive me on this. So for the worst of list, I don't really have a lot of dishonorable mentions. Probably just one dishonorable mention, and that is a space drama called Stowaway, directed by Joe Penna, who I liked his last movie called Arctic, starring Mads Mikkelsen, where it's him facing the tundra. This is basically a space crew who find a stowaway on board, and they have to like figure out a way to get enough oxygen to the destination that they're going, and they might have to sacrifice one to just like keep the mission on and floating like that. This movie was it had like a really good opening, but then it had a really good opening, but then the pacing just like started to slow down, and by the end of it I just didn't care. By the end it was just average. But other than that movie, the rest of these movies I gave below a 5. My number 10 worst is a movie called French Exit. This movie I watched at the New York Film Festival in October of last year. It stars Michelle Pfeiffer and Lucas Hedges. Michelle Pfeiffer plays a wealthy widow who decides she just wants to give up all her assets, move to Paris, and all that stuff. Basically, the term French exit is another word for like committing suicide or something like that. But this movie, it's trying to be absurd. And if you want to be absurd, just make it absurd. But I just didn't get into it. Like, I knew nothing about it going in. I didn't see any trailers for it. In fact, it was at the virtual film festival where I watched this movie at. But yeah, don't bother with French Exit. There is actually a really good scene where she's in a restaurant in Paris, and she uses like a cigarette to like burn like a prop of the restaurant because the waiter there was just being a snob. And that's probably the best scene. But other than that, don't bother. Lucas Hedges, I did not care for. Don't bother with French Exit. My number 9 worst of the year is the Mexican social thriller New Order, which was one of the first movies that I reviewed for this podcast. It basically became like a political thriller with a little bit of torture porn in there, and I was just like sick to my stomach while watching it. If you want to read my full thoughts on New Order, check out the very first episode of Film Etc., and you can hear my thoughts on it. My number 8 is the remake of Mortal Kombat. I didn't see the original Mortal Kombat movies from the 90s. I never played the video game before. I know how violent it was, but that's the main reason why this movie was oddly fun, is because of the crazy violence and gore and whatnot. But the acting's terrible. It's kind of a drag to get through pacing wise, and I just didn't find it very enjoyable. It has a good opening sequence, but other than that, I didn't care for it. My number 7 worst of the year so far is The Woman in the Window, which is trying to be an Alfred Hitchcock movie, but it's not. Plus, Amy Adams plays an agoraphobe, and she just like is just afraid of the outside world. And she then makes friends with Julianne Moore's character, but then she gets killed. But then she realizes what she thought was Julianne Moore, but is not Julianne Moore, is actually Jennifer Jason Leigh. And this movie was kind of weird. In fact, a lot of people were just panning this movie, but I didn't think it was that terrible. I mean, it's not very good in general, but I wouldn't call it like a bad movie. I mean, it's trying to have style and merit to it, but ultimately it just failed as a movie for me, and I was disappointed. So, The Woman in the Window, it's on Netflix. Don't bother. My number 6 worst movie of the year so far is a movie that came out very early in the year, and it's only available on HBO Max, called Lockdown. It stars Anne Hathaway and Chiwetel Ejiofor. They play a couple in London, but then all of a sudden, businesses are shutting down. This movie was filmed during the pandemic, and this movie is essentially a heist movie during the COVID lockdown. If you're trying to be a heist movie, make it zany and fun. This movie was not zany or fun. I was not highly invested in any of the characters, And for that, I just did not care for this movie. So yeah, Lockdown, skip this movie. My number 5 worst movie is The Ice Road, starring Liam Neeson, which I mentioned last week on this episode. If you want my full thoughts on The Ice Road, just listen to last week's episode. My number 4 worst movie of the year is Cherry, starring Tom Holland. Yes, I know some people are going to be mad at me, but this movie was way too long. And the second half of the movie is trying to be like this message about opioid abuse and how it just like messes you up. It's like if the Russo brothers are trying to make a Scorsese film, and ultimately it just failed. I did not care for it. Tom Holland is really, really good, but it just can't. This movie was a mess from beginning to end, stylistically and story wise. My number 3 worst movie of the year so far is Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard, which I reviewed a couple weeks ago. Listen to that episode and you'll see why. My number 2 is Infinite. Chiwetel Ejiofor, he's been having a terrible year so far. First Lockdown and now Infinite. Plus, you also have Mark Wahlberg in there. If you want to listen to my thoughts on that episode, just look for it somewhere on this show or something like that. But the number 1 worst movie I've seen so far all year, and in fact, this movie felt like a complete insult. It is the movie directed by Sia called Music. This movie is insulting. I am a man with autism, and one of the characters is a nonverbal autistic speaker, and she is played by Maddie Ziegler, who is a frequent collaborator. She is like the dancer on like most of Sia's music videos. This movie fails as a story. It fails on Sia's directing career. It fails on Kate Hudson's desperate acting career. This movie got 2 Golden Globe nominations, and it also got a couple Razzies as well. But overall, this movie was a complete insult to people who are treating nonverbal autistic people. And this movie was just completely missed opportunity, and it was trying so hard. Sia was trying to make a message or something like that. She even made a whole soundtrack or complete album based around the subject matter of the movie. But oh my, the only reason why it is preventing me from giving this movie a 0 is the presence of Leslie Odom Jr. He probably is the sole reason this movie works, yet his character in the movie has problems as well. All the characters are useless. You have cameos by like Juliette Lewis, and Kathy Najimy probably has like a voice cameo, and Tig Notaro, and even Sia herself. Don't bother with this movie. This movie was completely terrible. But anyway, guys, those are my picks for the worst movies of the year so far. I want to give you guys a quick recap for the best movies and worst movies of the year so far. My top 10 worst movies of the year are number 10, French Exit. Number 9, New Order. Number 8, Mortal Kombat. Number 7, The Woman in the Window. Number 6, Locked Down. Number 5, The Ice Road. Number 4, Cherry. Number 3, Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard. Number 2, Infinite. And the number 1 worst movie of 2021 so far is Music. And then the top 10 best movies of 2021 so far. Number 10, Night of the Kings. Number 9, Limbo. Number 8, Riders of Justice. Number 7, Quo Vadis, Aida. Number 6, Coda. Number 5, Raya and the Last Dragon. Number 4, The Mitchells vs. the Machines. Number 3, The Father. Number 2, Judas and the Black Messiah. And the number 1 best movie of 2021 so far is In the Heights. Anyway, guys, that'll about wrap it up for this week's episode. Thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode of Film Etc. I failed to mention this at the top of the show, but by the time this episode comes out, it'll be Independence Day weekend. So happy 4th of July to all of you out there. I hope you all stay safe. Make sure you follow and subscribe to this show so that you can get notified on new episodes on when they come out. You can find us on the many places that we stream, including Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, you name it. Make sure to leave a 5-star review so that we can get up to the top of the charts. Make sure you spread the word of mouth, share it with your friends, tell your friends all about it. I can't wait to see where this show goes down the road. You can follow me at Real Mike Webb on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. You can also follow the show on Instagram at FilmETCcast. Next week, it'll be the big review. We are reviewing Black Widow, and I'm also going to catch up on some other movies that came out this week, including the new movie The Tomorrow War, which is on Amazon Prime, starring Chris Pratt. But anyway, guys, thanks again for listening. Stay safe, wash your hands, and until next time, I will see you all at the cinema.